Thank you for joining us for our fourth exam masterclass free stream for Key Stage 5 for English A-level literature. Let's get started, shall we? Hello, hello. Feel free to say hello in the chat too. Let me know you can hear me as well. So welcome, as I've already said, to the fourth and final of our exam masterclass series for A-level English literature. And these are all in order to help you prepare for the different skills and knowledge needed at A-level, especially in this exam season where you know the content and you need a really good review from start to finish. So this will be looking at Christina Rossetti's poetry, and particularly as a comparison essay, because across the different exam boards, Christina Rossetti's poetry is one of the most commonly featured and one of the most commonly taken in terms of poetry anthologies and poems studied. So this was our choice at My Edspace to provide you with, hello, thank you for joining us, IGCSE. Again, how have your exams been? Still success, or are you on half term? Wonderful. So this will be us carrying on our ideas for exam masterclasses. So if this is your first one, don't worry, because you'll be able to jump straight in with us. This will be a 3-hour live stream, so do feel free to let your friends know that we are going to be carrying on from 3 till 6 p.m. UK time right here on my channel as well. Zakia, hello, thank you for joining us. Half time again, exams from Tuesday. Okay, good luck, because I won't see you again before our next stream. So let's get into this, shall we? If this is your first time joining us, and I could see we have some people who are experts in the chat already, but I'm Eleanor. I'm one of the English teachers and one of the teachers at My Edspace, and we're providing content for Key Stage 5 and GCSE students, particularly in advance of their exams, to help support them in their revision and help them do their best. So if you take a look at my channel, we have been doing free live streams on everything A-level from September in order to help prepare you for your exam. So feel free, if you're for example, a year 11 student or a year 12 student, to dip in and out of those different playlists that I have. I've done a whole playlist on Othello, a whole playlist on A Streetcar Named Desire, a whole playlist on The Great Gatsby. We're currently in our The Handmaid's Tale season and series, and then we're going to be doing more poetry from June, and this as well will be part of our poetry offering, but particularly focusing on comparison. Now let's take a look with a mind map here. What ideas do we have about a poem titled Remember? So pop your ideas into the chat, thinking about what could we draw just from a poem whose title is Remember. Take a look. So we're really starting from the beginning here. And if you're thinking, how are we going to fill these 3 hours? We'll be covering context, we'll be covering poetry analysis, comparative skills, A-level specifications, writing skills, model paragraphs, sentence starters, thesis statements, conclusions, etc. But if you need a break, need to come back, by all means do at your leisure. Okay, so let's think remember, shall we? So firstly, we're thinking about what it means to remember. It means not to forget. So thinking about something as a kind of memory or a reminder to remember about something. So something you don't want to lose, in other words. Some piece of memory, for example. So then with remember, we also have ideas, of course, of memory and perhaps of the past as well. Particularly if we're thinking about remember, they likely are positive ideas from the past there as well. We're thinking as well about what someone tells you to remember. Why someone says, remember this or remember that. It's usually because it's important, an important message, an important memory, some kind of remnant that stays with us. Now, that's not to say that other pieces aren't lost. So we need to think about the idea of not only memory and the past, but memory versus the past as well. So thinking about them not necessarily as the same idea. Are the facts of what life was like during that time the same as our memories of them, or do they change over time? We can also think of ideas of what do you remember or who do you remember? We can think about, for example, someone or something that's lost or finished or died, right? Particularly if we're thinking about things like remembrance ceremonies or memorials, all of those words come from the same word. So thinking of something or someone who is lost, ended, or perhaps dead. We can also think of the ideas of time passing and history as well as the past. And we can think about this poem. If we're being told to remember, then consider what that verb is. It's not a reminder, but it's remember. So really this poem is titled with an imperative verb. So this means that this is an instruction. Perhaps not an order, but something that's a need or a want. And if we're using imperatives, perhaps then we're also suggesting some kind of urgency, perhaps even desperation here. Please remember to bring your coat, that kind of thing. That says desperation right there. And this poem then serving as a way to remember, that message to remember. A way to remember. For example, like a reminder to remember, or remember to remember this. Which is really what a reminder is. So then who do we give reminders to? Well, people, and particularly imperatives to, people we want. It suggests that in this poem we are talking to someone, aren't we, as well? And we're not sure of the relationship yet, but we might be able to say perhaps that it's intimate, close. This idea of remembrance being linked to connections and memories as well. And so we have these different ideas already sprung just from this one word of the title. We also, and particularly if we're going to flex our Shakespearean knowledge, can think of this perhaps as resonant of Shakespeare, because Hamlet's famous ghost, their instruction was, remember me. So we can say perhaps that this is a subtle reference to Shakespeare, or a Shakespearean allusion, in other words. And what's Hamlet's ghost saying when he says, remember me? He's telling his son to remember his father, and perhaps as well to realize more about their death, and perhaps to get vengeance on what happened and who did this, what turns out to be murder. So thinking about this as a message from the dead then. So loads of different ideas here to play with from that first word. And let's take a look at what an A-level question looks like, because this is an example of one that you might have if you study Rossetti. And even if you don't, this is what they will look like regardless if you're talking about a comparative question for poetry from an anthology. It says, explore how Rossetti uses methods to discuss love in Remember and Another Poem. So with your poetry anthologies, you will have 20, typically for edXL. Generally, that's the same more broadly across the exam specifications, 20 poems that you learn over the course of your 2 years. And so you ought to know these poems really well. It's likely that you also know a lot of other information about these poets, as well as the times in which they're writing. So depending, you might have an anthology just based on one poet's work, or you might have an anthology of quite a few different people's work. For example, Rossetti also falls into the Victorian anthology under edXL. And so what you're given is one poem, and then usually blank copies of the rest of your poems. Because you have a set of 20 that you need to know, and you have roughly an hour and 7 minutes, an hour and 10 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes, depending on exam board, you only have that amount of time to produce a piece of work that's expected to be a thesis statement. So let's say that, a thesis statement, 3 to 4 comparative paragraphs, likely a conclusion, but I will put that in brackets because oftentimes people ask about the importance of a conclusion, and in my opinion, if you finish your final body paragraph really strongly with a nice bit of writer's intention and you draw the two poems back together, it's a little bit unnecessary. I'd much rather you spend your time on body paragraphs than on a conclusion, but if you do have time to do it, then a 1 or 2 sentence conclusion is sufficient. So this is what you have to do. You have your anthology, but this also means that you need to know in the time you have which poem works with Remember, which poems also discuss love, and which poems you can compare to Remember in this short amount of time as well. It's recommended you take 10 to 15 minutes to plan. So that means that's all the time you have to come up with all of the ideas and to reread the poems and choose your evidence. So you have to know the poems really well. You have to know what themes they have, and you have to know which ones pair well, because depending on what poem you're given, that limits your choices. And you don't want to just pick any poem or the poem that you feel confident about, because choosing poems that don't have a lot in common or don't even share the same theme will be much more difficult to write well and write particularly analytically well, because you're going to be trying to link these thematically, which means linking them by theme. So if they don't share any themes and don't have any ideas in common, that will be very difficult. It's not all about contrast, it's also about bringing them together. And part of what you're doing is showing that you can choose a poem that is a good choice. That's part of your points really in constructing an argument, because if you pick a poem that has nothing to do with it, it won't be a strong argument. And so what do you need to do? You need to write a comparison about love, comparing and contrasting how love is presented in both of these. And so we need to think about how love is presented in this as well as another poem. Well, let's take a look at Christina Rossetti and learn a little bit more about her, and then think about how we can analyze that poem using what we know, or perhaps remember, review about Christina Rossetti. And then we'll see how we can tie this into our analysis of her 2 poems. Okay? So Christina Rossetti was born in 1830 and died in 1894. She was the youngest of 4 children and lived in London amongst a literary and intellectual scene. Her father was a poet and a scholar of Italian literature, particularly of Dante Alighieri and Petrarch, which makes sense because Christina's brother was named Dante after Dante Alighieri. The father was exiled for his political views, and their mother was an educator. They were both free thinkers, and both of them, Gabrielle and Christina's mother, were supportive in the education of both their sons and their daughters. They had a lot of connections to the literary scene, and because their father was Catholic and their mother was Anglican, there was a lot of discussion of religious differences in the family, and this seeps into the language and the interests, if we're talking intellectually, of all of the different Rossetti children, and particularly informs Christina Rossetti's poetry. Rossetti and her sister Maria were educated at home in the classics, particularly by their mother, with literature, French, Italian, and at 13, her elder sister Maria published a translation of an Italian poem, and both of them studied the works of Dante Alighieri and Petrarch extensively. This is absolutely going to inform Christina Rossetti's work, particularly her use of the Petrarchan sonnet and the volta in particular as useful to her creating meaning. Father Gabriel struggled with illness and led to a period where he could not work for about 11 years. This led to financial difficulties for the family, as well as this long drawn out illness. He got very sick with bronchitis and seemingly another couple of things at the same time, and never got better. So it's this idea of slowly weakening, frailty, dying, and sickness. And this also is part of Christina Rossetti's experience as well. She was quite sickly across her life, and also in terms of physically, and then also suffered a mental breakdown at 14. She struggled with mental health issues and extended bouts of depression as well across her life, including in her later years. She was also very religious, particularly with her mother and her sister as well, all of them ascribing to a quite Anglican version of Christianity, and particularly thinking about self-abnegation, self-sacrifice, resilience, endurance, and faith. She, as a result of these religious beliefs as well, and how deep they were for her, refused to marry as part of her commitment both to her work and to her faith. She received 3 marriage proposals and was engaged twice, but did seem that she was worried, particularly in the case of her final engagement, about how marriage would affect her ability to devote herself to her faith, and particularly because her last engagement was to a man who was agnostic, which meant that the religious differences between them, she worried, would affect her and her faith, and even perhaps her afterlife. So she refused them, though it seems that in her, particularly her later years, her poetry as well reflects the fact that perhaps there's a bit of regret in choosing not to have any kind of fulfillment in love on earth. Now she's rejecting them in order to, this idea of self-abnegation or self-denial of everything and chastity, etc. in particular, in order to have fulfillment of all kinds in the future, in the afterlife. And this, we can see that doubt creeping in her later poems, in particular, thinking and questioning whether that was the correct choice, because they are still filled with longing, with love. And it does seem that she did love some of the people that she was engaged to across her life, but that this was coming as a sacrifice to a higher idea. She published Remember at 19 and was officially published at 18. She experimented with different forms and published a volume of poetry in 1847 that was believed to be privately published, and then later she was published more formally. Between 1848 and 1850, several poems of hers were published despite familial difficulties, and thus began her public career. So unlike many particularly women poets of the time, Christina Rossetti was known and appreciated as a poet during her lifetime. And this is interesting because this speaks to the level of her skill and the level of her complexity in a time in which there was so much poetical output, but also so many barriers to women poets. She also, though she wasn't technically a member of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, she did contribute to it through her brother. And this also led to her contributions to the Germ, which was the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's piece of writing that they put out. She often also modeled for Pre-Raphaelite paintings. Her poems of the period also reflect their ideas and philosophy, so it's believed that she contributed to them as well as was influenced by them. Rossetti, as I said, experienced fame and popularity during her lifetime, and received positive criticism from other poets, including Swinburne and later Tennyson. In 1862, Goblin Market and Other Poems, of course, Goblin Market is perhaps one of her best known poems today as well, a long poem there, were published. Her brother made woodcut illustrations to complement the poems as well, so it really became a kind of pre-Raphaelite Rossetti family project. And she was influenced by contemporaries like Elizabeth Barrett Browning, to whom she was also considered a successor, though again, if we think about the comparisons between the two, they do have quite a lot of difference in their poetry, though obviously both of an extremely high standard and both very well known in their lives. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was at one point considered for the poet laureate position, so that also is high praise for Christina Rossetti, though one does wonder as well if they weren't both women, would they be compared so closely as they were at the time? And she was also influenced by Keats, whose early Romanticism. Rossetti continued to have health issues in her later life, including a near-fatal attack of Graves' disease and recurring breast cancer, which again appears to have influenced the themes of her poems: frailty, longing, frustration, bitterness, pain, regret, contemplation of death and mortality, all there. And she died of breast cancer in 1894. Here are some of her most prominent themes: religious devotion, and particularly as well, thinking about religious devotion as a kind of loving devotion as well. Love and longing as well, and that being tied in again to the religious ideas of longing not only for someone, but longing for something like the afterlife, and longing particularly for the fulfillment of the afterlife as well. As well, sexual repression, and thinking about the ties between this longing and religious devotion also having undercurrents of sexuality as well. Darkness, death and the afterlife, time passing, distance and separation, the experience of women. She's often called a feminist or sort of proto-feminist poet, and her use of extended metaphors as well. It's not a theme, but it's certainly a very big part of her work. She was also described by her brother as having artless art. So the idea that things seem very surface level in her poetry, but actually contains so many layers. So it doesn't seem complicated and difficult. It seems really simple and beautiful, but then there are so many layers of meaning underneath, which is great if you're studying Rossetti for A-level, because that means there's so much you can talk about. And just a bit more context on the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And here is one of the most famous paintings from the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood that included people like William Holman Hunt, Millay, and of course Dante Rossetti as well. And the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was founded by Christina's brother Dante in 1849. There were originally 7 members. They were a group of avant-garde painters, poets, and critics who ascribed to the same artistic and aesthetic ideals. They were founded to revitalize the arts and recapture the artistic spirit of the Middle Ages. So returning to these ideas of past eras that they viewed as having lost something from them. And we can see this even in the construction of this painting, which is called The Awakening, The Awakening Conscience, excuse me, and it's by William Holman Hunt. And thinking of this as very clearly depicting pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood ideas of art, because this is quite a radical painting for this time, not least because this woman is believed to be having a kind of awakening morally, while previously having been sat on a man's lap, not appropriate or acceptable in this time period, while particularly indication that she is not married to him. So this idea of physical intimacy, etc., and this kind of spiritual or moral awakening here. And this is all based on this kind of rejection of particularly the Royal Academy of Art, also known as the RA, that was the preeminent instructor of artists of the day. And Dante Rossetti, as well as his compatriots, rejected the restrictions and the conventions that the Royal Academy imposed on art, and wanted to show a kind of art that was not following those rules, because they thought those rules were moving away from what art actually was, and that it was not actually saying anything anymore. So returning to the ideas, particularly in the Middle Ages, there's ideas of devotion and of art for art's sake, as they say. Here is their manifesto. So focusing on genuine ideas and to connect with real emotion and spirituality rather than convention, particularly those rights and wrongs of the Royal Academy, literally saying this is art, this is not art, this is too weak to be art, this is not constructed correctly to be art. They were brightly colored, as we can see, intensely as well, evenly lit pictures, so it almost looks flat, and richly detailed language as well in the writing portion. Also taking independent inspiration, not influenced by reigning conventions, so not trendy poetry, not trendy paintings, but doing what you want. And as we said, art for art's sake. Taking inspiration from Shakespeare. So if we think back to our mind map, that perhaps reference to Shakespeare, that sounds a lot more like it's going to be relevant to someone like Christina Rossetti, who clearly is returning to these themes of Shakespeare, Keats, Tennyson, as well as Arthurian and Greco-Roman mythology. So think about legends of King Arthur and legendary figures more broadly, as well as legends from ancient Greece and ancient Roman mythology. There's also a focus on sensory realism and a focus on small, often quotidian, which means daily objects. So if we look at this painting above me, we've got a cat, we've got a glove on the ground, we've got sheets of music, we've got someone dressed in quite an informal style for the day, and we've got bits of pieces on the floor like the string or the yarn there on the floor. This is adding detail that conventionally at the time was not considered part of what art was. And this also will ring true of Rossetti's poetry, that we have this feeling of realism here. Things seem real. If you look at the lace on this dress, we can see that it does have an element of realism to it. The fabric of the carpet as well, the shininess of the wood of the piano, and the focus on small details and objects in particular we're going to see in Rossetti's poetry. Inspiration from the poetic continuum, so thinking about poetry and what poetry is and how that tradition has started and will carry on. Lush vowel sounds, sensory description, subjective psychological states, so thinking about different interpretations of madness or longing, etc. Focusing on medieval, mythological, and historical ideas, the acceptance of death and the view that material troubles pale in comparison to mental struggles, the renunciation of human desire, so the human as simply a disposable mortal, and this idea of bigger and more influential forces at play, perhaps stemming those from the Romantics. Thinking of Christian, legendary, and mythological imagery in both Rossetti and the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood paintings, sculptures, writing, and symbolism and rich use of metaphor. Okay, so we've got the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. It was called the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood because with Raphael, who was a painter in the Italian Renaissance, they thought that at that point, at the point of Raphael, that art became good or bad or too full of conventions, and because everyone was trying to copy Raphael, and that so everything became just a copying of itself rather than expressing something new and real. And let's cover a little bit about the time period as well. And here again is another pre-Raphaelite painting, this one of the death of Ophelia, Shakespeare from Hamlet, so important here, and from Millet. So here we can see this rich, vibrant color. We can see the flowers, the life and death juxtaposed here, because here Ophelia is dead and has committed suicide here in the river. And this is partly because the Victorian era, more broadly, was one in which society was obsessed and fascinated with death. This was developed through quite a lot of different elements, one of which was the high mortality rates due to rampant disease, poor living conditions and hygiene. Of course, people like Keats died of tuberculosis. It was very common during the time as well to contract sicknesses like tuberculosis, the coughing sickness, and be coughing up blood within a matter of days, weeks, or months, and being dead quite quickly. These sudden deaths, particularly of young and healthy people, were common, but were also tragic. But it made life seem a little bit more tenuous and fragile, and perhaps put death as more of a consideration for the audience. We also have these ideas of Christian theology about the afterlife as one either filled with punishment or with glory. So obviously everyone's hoping for glory and for paradise, but this was the idea that people were striving to make it, and that this life currently, this mortal life, doesn't matter as much as the eternal life. And so we're actually living for that life, not for this life now. This preoccupation, because remember, at the time, that was predominantly a Christian country. And so thinking about them as all sharing these beliefs, obviously there was a spectrum within the intensity of those beliefs. But certainly this was language that people had in society, was as part of the zeitgeist. But there were also new technologies seeking to prolong life and even escape death, new medicines, new understandings of the world, new topics of study like anatomy and physiology that were growing in the Victorian, the Romantic eras as well. And attempts to create medicines, for example, or treatments that would escape death or even dull pain. There were also, more broadly, customs and etiquette of mourning, which included established mourning periods for spouses. So these included what you wore, particularly as a spouse, what you wore during the years after your partner died, as well as how you behaved socially. So it was typical that a spouse, if their husband or wife died, would be in mourning for 2 years. So they would only be allowed to wear black. They would only be allowed to behave in a somber way. They weren't able to go out for seasons of partying, etc. They weren't allowed to be too joyful, and they also weren't allowed to date anyone else during that time, because that was appropriate. That was considered the respect for the spouse and an appropriate period of mourning. And there were pamphlets and literature put out about this all the time. So this was a common idea. And if someone did not follow these expectations, they would be considered, that would be considered transgressive and unacceptable. This was exemplified in particular by Queen Victoria, because Rossetti lived and wrote during the period of national mourning for King Albert. So particularly just before Goblin Market and other poems came out, Prince Albert died, and when a king or queen at this time, in addition to these other established periods of mourning, there was a period of national mourning for the entire country, that everyone was meant to be in mourning for Prince Albert as their prince. And Queen Victoria did go through this period of mourning, but she extended it. She was in mourning, technically in mourning, for 40 years, because for the rest of her life after her husband died, she wore black and she was in mourning and behaved within the social and personal behaviors of someone who was in mourning. And we can see this as well with even the architecture of London. We've got the Prince Albert Bridge, we've got the Prince Albert Memorial, we've got the Victoria and Albert Museum. There are spattered across London many different tributes to Prince Albert, which also shows another idea about death, right? And this idea of memory and remembering about death. And so perhaps Rossetti was influenced in trying to capture something about this time, but also experienced the illness and death of her father, as well as her own fragile health. So perhaps as well, she was thinking about her life and her own mortality. So if we're thinking about how we can implement these contextual ideas into our analysis of Rossetti's poems, we can implement them into understanding more about the themes, can't we? Particularly the themes, as we said, of Rossetti's, of death and longing and religion and love, because we've got all of these ideas of love being linked to death, for example, through Queen Victoria's mourning. We've got death, obviously, in this fascination in the zeitgeist, in the Victorian era more broadly. We've got these ideas of Rossetti's own fragility here, as well as the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's interest in death, and this death as a release, perhaps, or in the Christian ideology, as an entrance into a better place. So we want to tie these up and think about these ideas as influencing the poet in their depiction of these themes. And they can also bring us closer to understanding what the portrayals of love, for example, will be like in Remember. They might be influenced by death. They might be linked to this longing, perhaps of her own failed engagements or terminated engagements, thinking about this sense of unfulfillment, perhaps. And let's think about what examiners want to see in the exam. Here is a quotation from the examiner's report recently, well, from years past. Obviously, your poetry ones have not been released as yet for this exam cycle. And this is what they say. Avoid being overly definite about what poems mean. Be aware of and try to convey nuance in your interpretation. Avoid analyzing specific features of structure and language in isolation. Don't leap straight into explaining how the writers had used these before outlining the premise of the poem. Otherwise, it's likely your comments will be vague, unconnected to the overall impact of the poem. Start with the premise of the poem or key imagery before explaining how the structural aspects develop, mirror, or even subvert the ideas in the poem. Avoid what Professor Robert Eaglestone recently described as the incorrect version of how we interpret literary texts, which encourages feature spotting and an overemphasis on mastering vocabulary. This is not particularly useful in explaining how meaning is created within poems. Instead, relate writers' choices to the themes, messages, or impacts of the poems. So then here, what does this mean? This means don't tell in your poem what this clearly means, because we don't know. The only person who can really say that is Christina Rossetti, and unfortunately, she has been dead for over 100 years. So she can't tell us, and so we can't say for sure what she's saying here. So be mindful in your language that you build nuance in. That can be as simple as adding she possibly suggests, or perhaps this may, and using modal verbs in your interpretation, as well as perhaps suggesting alternative interpretations by saying, alternatively, it could be this. Because if you're unsure, then likely it's on purpose, especially with Rossetti, who has so much meaning. There is likely going to be another way we can interpret this. We will see this in Remember and our other poem. And also, don't talk about features. So one of the most common things I see students doing is writing paragraphs where they want to just talk about the metaphor. Both poems use metaphors. And I see where you're going. You're finding something that they both have and you're trying to bring them together. But likely both of those metaphors are being used completely different. So in talking about metaphors, you're actually talking about something that has in the poem completely different purposes. So they're not really working the same way. It's the same way with natural imagery. What you want to consider is not the natural imagery, that they both use natural imagery, but that they use natural imagery to do what? So what are they trying to say here? Because if you think thematically, if you think about the reason they're talking about it first, then you will avoid this vague and unconnected failure to link back to the poem. If you're just talking about techniques, you aren't actually saying why they're important. What you do need to do first is say, what is the poem saying? The poem is describing love as urgent, love as full of longing, love as unrequited. And then show how the enjambment suggests this sense of unrequited love because it's reaching out, it's clearly unfulfilled. And then you have more of an idea of linking your devices to the argument you're making and to the writer's intention. That will stop you as well from saying, hey, look, I've found something here in the poem that I can talk about. Look, they have a lot of caesura. Let's talk about it. Because that only gets you so far. It doesn't even matter if you're using fancy poetic terms or if you're saying repetition, imagery, end stops, etc., a detailed language even, because if you are spending your time focusing on the fanciest analepsis or whatever it is you want to say, then you're likely not focusing on what the point of that is. So tell me, what's the point of repetition? Repetition, emphasis. What is being emphasized and why? And if you do so, then you'll be able to show how these different choices within the poem about love actually influence and develop those ideas or reflect those ideas or subvert, so challenge those ideas as well. For example, that caesura might be important in the beginning, but the caesura in the end of the other poem might be doing the opposite and saying, well, actually, this poem is requited now, so we don't have to carry on the poem. I'm thinking, for example, of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, for those who know. And it's the same with mastering vocabulary. So you don't need to use the fanciest words possible. It's good to have a high level of ambitious vocabulary, but don't try and use words you don't know well. Be confident that you're using them well, because it's better to use a simpler word and say it really well and make a really nice point with it than it is to say something complicated that you're not quite getting right. Your job, how meaning is created. So what are they saying about love? How are they doing that? So really following that what, how, why paragraph you may remember. And then linking this to the themes, the message, the impact of the poems. This is the same idea again, isn't it? Love shown through these different ideas. That's what they're trying to say about love. Okay? Any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. The best questions you want to be thinking, and the questions I find myself saying the most often when I'm marking students' work, is what's the point? What's the point of what you're telling? What's the point of you telling me about the enjambment? Why are you telling me about it? And then after that, so what? So what that they're saying that they're using enjambment? What does it mean? And why are they telling you this? Or why are you telling me that there is imagery in the poem? Tell me what it says about love. Get me to that point, because that is actually answering the question. If you've been in one of our sessions before, you may remember these poetic devices, but I will run through them quickly just so that we make sure that we feel confident with knowing what they are. Again, nothing that likely you have not seen before, because you don't need to. These are key poetic devices for a reason. These are the ones you know for a reason, because these are the ones that get you very far. So here, caesura, stop in the middle of a line with punctuation usually. Enjambment, carrying on after the end of the line. So caesura, a sense of pause and a reminder about the words around it, because likely they are important. We're drawing focus to them by stopping and breathing in the middle of a sentence or a line. And enjambment, that sense of flow and carrying on, continuity, extension across the lines of the poem. End stops, a sense of finality, perhaps at the end of a line, a sense of conclusion, a sense of acceptance. Repetition, alliteration, repeated first sound. So those can be, depending on what letter is being repeated, soft and soothing, perhaps creating a sense of euphony, which we will get to in a moment, but really just means the pleasant effect. Or it could create cacophony, which is that negative effect of lots of harsh words like K's and T's that creates a sort of harsh spitting sound. Repetition, of course, emphasis. So if a word is repeated, look at it. Why is it being repeated? What's the point? Why are we returning to it? And then for imagery, this can be biblical imagery, this can be natural imagery, sensory imagery, whatever type you want to speak of, religious imagery as well, light imagery, dark imagery, etc. Color imagery, there's so much you could talk about, but it's using again to draw detailed descriptions, focusing us on important parts. Light and darkness, usually linked to positive and negative. If they're not, then that's important as well, because that might be subverting those typical views. The title, of course, will always give you key details and foreground important ideas, even if they later subvert them, as we will see. And for the example, in our second poem we're going to look at, they will give us a hint about that's not included in the body of the poem. So always take a look at the titles. They choose them for a reason. Even if it's something like Sonnet 29, then you want to be mindful, because sonnet gives us a key about the information as well, right? That it's a sonnet, that it is perhaps linking to ideas of love and spirituality and devotion. First and last lines will likely show a shift in the poem or return to key ideas. Then you can work out, is this a cyclical structure, for example? Has this meaning shifted at some point? If so, where? Do we have a sense of conclusion or resolution at the end of the poem or not? The same with the structure of the poem. Notice the lines, stanzas. Are they rigid? Are they changing across the poem? Is there suddenly white space? If so, why do you reckon that is? Also, you need to know some of the key poems, like a sonnet, right? You want to know a sonnet in particular, perhaps our most important one. Longer, shorter lines, as I said, any disruptions to the structure or the rhyme scheme. Rhyme as well, of course, is important, because rhyme is really repetition, isn't it? It's the repetition of sounds, which means it's emphasizing those words. If these are a pattern, that's likely important. If this pattern changes at any point, that's even more important, that it breaks at some point. If there's rhyme in the middle of a line, then internal rhyme, that is also significant, because likely that's an important line, or we're hearing an echo of a word that we need to remember. Meter as well, typically iambic. That's that da-dum. It's also helpful to know spondee, which is dum-dum, together like Law and Order, SVU. And a trochee is the opposite of an iamb. So it would be dum-da, dum-da. So we can hear that differently. But in most of them, most commonly is iambic, because it sounds natural. It sounds like a heartbeat. But when you don't see that, again, it's likely a choice. Tense, also helpful for thinking about past, present, future, perspective. If there's a change in tense, that's going to be important. It might be hope, it might be action, it might be reflection as well. Of course, this is not new information for you, and not even necessarily clear only for poetry, but thinking about that is key. Rhetorical questions, of course, we know, helpful if we think about what the answer we're being pointed to is. Onomatopoeia is the phonetic imitations of what the sound is. So boom, crash, clap, etc. Symbols, we know as well, something used to represent a more complex idea. If we're thinking about the most common symbols, hands, light, stars, sun, moon, heart, doors, all of those are the key ones necessarily. Flowers as well, birds, freedom. Then strong verbs, again, that might suggest a sense of movement, importance, urgency. Collective pronouns as group, collective, or distance, so we and us versus they and them. Juxtaposition as well, really helpful because likely there will be two different ideas in a poem. If they have a kind of contrast to them, we can say that they're juxtaposed to bring them together. Sibilance is the repetition of S sounds that can be calming in a soothing kind of way or ominous in a kind of hissing, unsettling way. Consonance is the repetition of consonant sounds. It can often sound noisy, chaotic, or unharmonious and may create cacophony, as we said, but it can also, if it's soft consonants, so if it's W's or H's or TH's sometimes as well, if we're thinking about or or M's, N's, they sound a lot softer and might suggest a kind of soft, cooling calmness, but the harsher consonants, more unpleasant. Assonance is vowels, the same as consonants, but for vowels. And it's almost always light, pleasant, melodious. Sometimes it also helps with a kind of rhymey sound to it as well. It might create euphony. Tone, of course, we know tone, the attitude. We will look a little bit more about tone in a moment. If we're thinking about structure words, a volta, often people use a volta if they're not talking about a sonnet. A volta is a sonnet term. So talk about it using sonnets. Hello, Olumide, thank you for joining us. So use it for sonnets, and it's particularly for Petrarchan sonnets, so it will be helpful for your study of Rossetti. It's when after the 8th line, so in the 9th line, the subject, attitude, or perspective shifts. And it usually shifts from one idea to another idea or another attitude about the same idea. If this shift happens earlier or later, take note. If this shift is providing a completely different perspective, take note. Similarly, for sonnets in general, if poems are 14 lines, it's extremely likely they're sonnets. And if they are also 13 lines or 15 lines, they're probably playing with sonnet structure. So they're either a truncated sonnet, which means they're cut off the last line or two, perhaps, or they are extended, perhaps that's showing that sense of overflowing. Simile and metaphor, of course, we know different ways to compare. Be mindful that you don't mix them up because often people are telling me that it's a simile with no like or as there. Pathetic fallacy is also helpful for thinking about the setting or the setting matching the character or mood. Perspective as well. Are we talking about first perspective and thus creating an intimate and personal tone, or are we third person and thus creating distance? Diacope is one of the words that's a little bit more specific that I find helpful, which is just a word for close repetition of the same word next to each other or in the same line. Allusions are a reference to another text. So for example, biblical allusions are probably your most common. Epiphora is the repetition at the ends of lines, and anaphora is the repetition at the beginnings of lines. So here we've got plenty to be getting on with. You can also make flashcards here to go through the definition on one side, the word on the other side, and revise these so that you know these off the back of, like the back of your hand, because then you'll be able to notice and apply them better. Also consider including the effect of these on your flashcard as well. So talk about the definition and the effect so that you know how they're being used. Because again, saying alliteration or diacope is not enough. Tell me what's being emphasized and why. With that, I said we would talk about tone. So particularly helpful for comparison because you're likely comparing two poems that have a lot of similarities, right? But you also want to show that they are not the same poem. And one of the really good ways that allows you to write quite a lot of subtlety into your writing is by talking about the tone. So they both talk about love and longing, at the beginning of their poems, but one has a more this tone and one has a more that tone. It's also helpful, again, to know within positive and negative some different degrees of how positive or negative things are with tones. So you can always start with positive and negative, but try and refine them. So bitter is very different than apprehensive, for example. Mournful and ironic are both different, even though they're both negative. So we want to be mindful of the fact that some of these are smaller words that are more subtlety, some of them are deeper words. It's helpful to have quite a few tone words in your arsenal so that you can apply them as you like. And particularly if you're thinking about your anthologies, think about the tones that are created in your poems and make sure you have ways to talk about them. So I'll just run through these. If you want any defined, by all means, pop into the chat. But I'll just run through these so you have them. Reflective, pensive, joyful, mocking, mournful, enthusiastic, apprehensive, conversational, acerbic, witty, familiar, optimistic, hopeful, critical, ironic, playful, nostalgic, ambivalent, questioning, straightforward, fervent, light-hearted, resigned, elegiac, pessimistic, fearful, thoughtful, condescending, giddy, sardonic, caustic, detached, equivocal, assertive, ardent, bitter, concerned, defiant, wistful. So you've got loads there. You can see that they are quite good words, so quite high-level vocab, but also cover quite a lot of ground if we're talking about positives and negatives here, rather than just saying that or just always saying hopeful, right? We've got a little bit more than that to play with here. So now let's look at the poem. Again, feel free to pop in the chat any questions you have, any ideas you have, any thoughts that you want to share. But let's take a look at the poem, keeping an eye out for how patterns and how meanings about love are shaped. So I'm going to read through the poem and then we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to take it line by line after I've read through it the first time to make sure that you feel really covered on what we're saying in this poem. So just a reminder that in the description of this video, there is a workbook there for you so that you can do all of these annotations as well. For those of you who've been here for our previous streams, you'll know that there is a workbook where you can download this if you put your email in, and then you'll be able to access this workbook and the workbooks for our other exam masterclass sessions as well across April and May. Those were Othello, A Streetcar Named Desire, Unseen Poetry, and now Poetry Comparison with Christina Rossetti. So do please access that workbook. It has all of these slides in it and you can annotate them and make them your own, and then you can leave with a really full set of notes on these poems, and particularly helpful if you have Rossetti. So I'm going to read and then we'll talk through bit by bit. Again, any questions, any problems with accessing the workbook, let us know and Zakia will be able to help you as well. Okay, so Remember by Christina Rossetti. Remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you can no longer hold me, no more hold me by the hand. Nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. Only remember me. You understand, it will be late to counsel then or pray. Yet if you should forget me for a while and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that once I had, better by far you should forget and smile than that you should remember and be sad. Any thoughts? Feel free to put in the chat. So just to give you a summary of this poem, the speaker is dying or worried about dying and asking their lover, who will be left on earth without them, to remember them. And they're thinking about obviously their mortality. And then in the second part of the poem, they think about the fact that they will be separated and that forgetting the speaker for a little bit every once in a while, or forgetting them, is actually okay, because it's much better to forget and be happy, and the speaker wants their lover to be happy, even if that means forgetting, rather than remembering and being sad. Okay, so let's get into it. Remember me when I am gone away. Gone far away into the silent land. Well, firstly, of course, we've got that word again, remember. So all of those ideas we looked at for the poem title are also going to apply to that word there. So we're not going to write all of them out. And I'm not going to write a huge amount unless I'm pointing you to a certain place here, because then it will get too messy on your screen. But feel free to take notes as we're going through. So this is, remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land. This instruction here, the speaker clearly here, through this use of imperatives, is creating a sense of request, perhaps a sense of urgency, perhaps desperation. But also this suggests that the speaker is speaking directly to the lover, and that this is intimate and this is loving. And in the language, we can see it's quite frank, direct, though it might be pleading to a certain extent. It is also quite an intimate request, right? And the remember me, even further reinforcing this connection to Hamlet, of remember me as that resonance from after death. Hello, Vanny. Thank you for joining us. Zakia, thank you very much for being there. Remember me. So this then becomes an apostrophe, which means that the speaker is speaking directly to the person that they are addressing, which again creates a sense of intimacy here as they are talking. And this line is really the crux of the poem's message, is remember me when I'm dead. And this is gone away, gone far away into the silent land. This gone away, gone far away. Now that is an example of diacope, isn't it? Because we're saying gone away, gone far away there. And interesting that, because firstly, gone away is euphemistic, isn't it? It's talking about death. We get the impression, gone away, gone far away, and the silent land altogether, we're imagining death, right? But gone away, silent land, that's euphemism. Why do we speak in euphemism when we're speaking about death? Perhaps because we ourselves are worried about death, but also perhaps, especially when we're speaking to someone we care about, we don't want to upset them either, right? So this fact of unknowing and this fact of comforting there as well. So perhaps even though it's the speaker who's dying, they are trying to comfort the person who's going to live. Interesting, right? And notice the enjambment and that gone away, gone far away. That far there is doing something interesting. She could have said gone away into the silent land. But we have that far there that creates just that little bit more of distance as we go through. And if we think about the soft end stop at the end of the first line, there is a comma there, but the idea still carries on, doesn't it? Gone away, gone far away. So there's this sense of, in the end stop itself, a sense of ending. But then also there's a sense of continuation and distance, separation, and unreachable permanence. This separation of the when I'm gone away into the silent land. There's a sense of moving away from there. That's emphasized by that far as well. Then we have into the silent land. So silent land, of course, again, is death, but speaking about the idea of silent land, then this is a place that they are going to be physically as well as spiritually, mentally, emotionally separated here. And this idea of silence, then, we're thinking again about another kind of distance, which would be the lack of communication, this separation that they cannot bridge through communication here because they can't reach each other or because the speaker has been silenced by death. Notice as well, gone far away, that gone there is a trochee there again. So thinking about the flip of the iamb, which actually emphasizes the gone rather than the far. So gone then being an important word. And thinking as well a little bit about the passivity of gone. There's a kind of wordlessness to where gone is, but it also suggests a kind of absence of self here. It's not that she is going, it's that she is gone. So it's almost she's been disappeared and taken away by something bigger than herself. And then that silent land, we've got a stronger end stop there because we've got a semicolon, which is a bigger pause than a comma. And that silent land semicolon then adds a greater sense of distance and finality again. That influences that impression of distance and separation. Then, when you can no more hold me by the hand. Well, we've got a couple of different ideas here. Notice how we're being referred to in our referential strategies. We've got you and me here so far. So this idea of separation, even on the word level of the you and me, there's no us right now. You and me are separated. And no more, this is going to be the first use of no more, and it will return again. So this idea of endings, again, no more, this distance, it kind of echoes across the poem, but it doesn't seem bitter, it seems quite gentle. And then we've got this hold me by the hand. That's where we've got that soft consonance of the H's there, as well as this idea of physical connection and touch that is contrasted to the silent land and the gone away, right? So this contrast between touch and closeness and distance here, those ideas of touch, closeness, distance then as juxtaposed. And this hold me by the hand, the H soft consonants perhaps also suggests a sense of hesitation, as well as because it's carried across the line, hold me by the her hand, and then later on the next line as well, we have this sense of reaching out across the line, that we have this hand reaching out to try and get back to the lover, but can't necessarily. We also perhaps have a sense of fear and uncertainty, that kind of shiveriness of there, and maybe of intimacy and touch and affection, or the memory of these things. So the H might be a kind of panting, a begging, a plea, an effort to reach the lover. But we also have the elements of what a hand is. And that h sound could be sort of soft touching sounds, especially linking us to this image of a hand and this symbol of a hand. Because what does a hand symbolize? Connection, closeness, touch. And so thinking even of something almost like, if you've seen Michelangelo's The Birth of Creation, with Adam and God reaching out and trying to touch each other, then it's almost the sense of that, right? You can no longer hold me by the hand there. And then we have this, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. What are they talking about? They're talking about, nor can I half turn away and yet turning stay. So there's this kind of turn away, turn back. Because the speaker is suggesting, and Rossetti is suggesting, that this is not a little half-hearted separation. This is, you will be separated permanently. So there's again this hesitation of wanting, of turning away and wanting to turn back. And again, we see the H's there with that, with half turn away yet going stay. So that kind of continuation then again, including on the line level with that soft end stop of the comma. Turn by the hand, nor I half turn. So they want to go and yet turn to stay. So we have that double turn. It's not quite internal rhyme, but it's repetition within the line there, which suggests this indecision of turning back and forth and wanting to stay. There is a kind of parallelism there, as well as antithesis, because we've got that turn, turn, but we've also got the go and stay in the same line as well. So this reticence, in other words, to go. Notice as well, that is the conclusion of our first rhyme there, because there we have A, B, B, A. So this is our first quatrain in our what's going to be a sonnet. And we've got that even on the rhyme scheme level, we've got that sense of turning and turning back, because we've got the A, B, B, A, that ebb and flow of distance and memory and wanting to come back. And they're doing that on the level of rhyme as well as with the end stop. We've got that turning stay, that pause that suggests perhaps a desire to stay, but also perhaps suggests the finality of that silent land, because she says, no more can I do that. So we have a sense of finality there. Then in our next piece, remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. We've returned again to remember me. So now this is becoming a little bit of parallel structure as well here. Remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. Notice there we've got our only collective pronoun here that is extremely significant, because here, remember me, firstly, we've got this idea of returning to this idea, literally a memory itself, right? Of remember to turn away, remember to turn back, remember me when no more, day by day. Again, a sense of building distance here. These push-pull forces and this distance increasing as time passes here. The indecision of half turn, half back and forth, not quite reconciled. But with the day by day, it seems like time is passing continuously. That passage of day and day moving us in a linear way, whereas the half turn, half go was more this indecision of going back and forth. And we have that second no more again. No more day by day. So this idea that the time has ended here for us. And this doesn't seem to be blaming either, does it? It doesn't seem to be any resentment there, but it's just this sense of ending. No more day by day, past, past, past. Notice there we have our first lack of end stop as we carry from one line into the other without a break. Day by day, we're shooting there off. Day by day, you as well. Day by day, time extending out, and then you are moving day by day. We have aligned day with the lover now. And you tell me, because what can the speaker do? They're gone away. They're in the silent land, right? You tell me, one-sided there, of our future that you planned. A couple of different ways we can look at this one. This idea of you tell me of our future that you planned. This idea that the speaker can no longer speak, and the lover is talking about the future that they had planned to have when they were together and both alive, but now will not be able to have because the speaker is dying. And we can also say with this that there is an element of you tell me of our future that you planned, and that you and you there suggesting a power dynamic that seems a little bit unpleasant, doesn't it? Remember, Rossetti did separate from multiple suitors during her time. So this idea, perhaps in an alternative interpretation, of perhaps distancing themselves from someone who is too controlling, right? your idea of the future. We are not going to have that anymore because that was your idea and we're not going to be together anymore. So that is an interesting one to talk about if you're looking for a little small alternate interpretation, because there in that line we've got a little bit of there to play with, especially as we meet together in that our future. Future then was together, and we don't have that anymore because only the lover is going to go off into the future, and this speaker won't have that, either because they've left or because they've died. And again, notice a harsher end stop that you planned. Who is going on with this future? Only the speaker. So we come together, we're so close here, then we do finally come together in our future, and then we return to you, and we don't have another I here for quite a while until here. So we have, again, a sense of real distance, and with that colon there, another sense of pause, because we're not coming with, the speaker is not coming with. And then perhaps the most spoken about line, only remember me, you understand. It will be late to counsel then or pray. So there, only remember me, you understand. Let's talk about that part first. Only, the adverb there is important because that's the thing that influences the meanings here and layers meanings on. Hello, Dihiro. Thank you for joining us again. Lovely to have you. We're jumping straight in. So download the workbook in the description and you'll be able to follow along. So here, only remember me. Notice as well, this is one of our only moments of caesura, so it has to be important. And what is being split apart here? Me and you. Me is going to stay in the present. You is going to go into the future day by day. So we literally have here a bifurcation of the line into me in the past and you in the future. Notice again, going forward. And only remember me can be interpreted generally 3 different ways. We can say that it says, only remember me. So don't love someone else, remember me, and only love me, only remember me. Or it can be, remember me, but don't do anything else. So only remember me. You don't have to not marry again. You don't have to die as well. You don't have to be stuck in this moment forever. Just remember me as you go forth in your life. Remember me and our lives. And then the final one, only remember me, is this idea of still remember me despite it all there. So only remember me. So nevertheless, remember me despite all of this difficulty. Pause. So important. Split. So important. And then you understand. You understand. So here, even though this is not our volta, it does appear that there's a kind of mini shift here, or a mini volta here, because here in this bifurcated line, we seem to split off and we begin to think about the lover only and how their life is going to be going forwards. Whereas previously we were talking about the speaker's experience and the speaker leaving. Now we're talking about the lover's life after we know that our future is no more. You understand it will be late to counsel then or pray. So in other words, perhaps that will give us more of a hint about which layer of only remember me is most important here, which is perhaps that only remember me, because In other words, they only remember me, but don't do any more, because there won't be time to counsel then or pray. It'll be too late. And thinking about even praying, and again, notice this idea of it being too late there suggests that there's nothing more that can be done. They'll be in heaven, or they'll be in the afterlife of some description, and you can't give me any more advice, and you can't pray for me. Don't bother, I'll be where I am. And this does speak to the high Protestantism of Rossetti as well, in the beliefs that there was no need to pray for people who were dead because they were already in the place that they were, and that was already sorted. So yes, we have this bifurcated line, this before and after, this me and then you. And I think it's important that it's me at the first half of this line as the past, and then moves on, shifts to you going forwards. The only as well can be this ideas of desperation, insistence, pleading, or between the previous pleas of remember me, remember me, remember me, and then shifting to a more rational idea, this accepting of you understand. Just remember me. You understand that it'll be too late to do anything else. I know that. You know that. And this adds an element of verisimilitude, which means an element of seeming truthful and real. Because it's this kind of sad realism. It stops it from being too sentimental in this shift that we're doing in these lines. Because before it was a little bit emotional. Oops, apologies. A little bit emotional in the ideas of remember me, remember me. It almost seems like an impossibility to a certain extent to dedicate your whole rest of your life to remembering someone who's died. So here we're thinking perhaps in this beginning of a shift, maybe it's okay if they do. And that's really then getting us to our real Volta, which is this line 8. And notice, line 9. And notice we've again followed the same rhyme scheme. So again, and notice the lines that start remember here bring us back in that second stanza. We start the same way. It's too late to counsel or pray. And then we have that end stop that again finishes that idea for us. Then we have our shift. Yet. So clearly with yet, we can think of this as a mindset change. If you should forget me for a while. So this is amending their request or relenting, and again, seems much more rational of, I know you're going to forget me at some point or forget about me at some moment. That's okay. It doesn't seem like resentment. It seems like forgiveness, this transition into acceptance. If you should forget me for a while. Again, notice the difference, the distance between the pronouns here. And we've got these ideas of separation again, the internal rhyme of yet and forget as well. So we've still got echoes a little bit. And this for a while is interesting as well, because it's just saying, don't forget me permanently. But if you forget me for a bit and afterwards remember, do not grieve. So there, we've got a couple of different bits here. Just highlighting so we can see where we are in the poem. Do not grieve. Interesting this here. Because we've lost the me. Before it was remember me, only remember me. Now we've just got remember. So it's almost like me here is being lost in the poem, and the me is fading away here, and it's only the you that stays. The speaker is fading out into the distance. And this while that we will see is going to return in a rhyme as well. And again, we have this idea of afterwards remember. So as we carry on progressive wise, remember again, here we're in the middle of the line. And we've got the comma again, the second caesura that we've had here. So again, remember that pause of memory, isn't it? Of remembering and taking that moment to reset. After remember, do not grieve. So here we have a little bit of absolution, a little bit of forgiveness, right? Of remember, I won't be mad if you forget me. Do not grieve. And this is also could be, you know, don't become embroiled in sadness here. Just remember how much we loved each other. Don't grieve. Likely also because she is meant to be in a better place. Again, that colon there, do not grieve. There's a sense of finality to it there, which suggests total absolution, right? There's no bitterness there. Do not grieve. You're okay. And then notice as well, we've got that yet in those two lines, which here is the volta, and again is these flips of the meter here of yet if changes there, yet if you should. So it's a spondee there, which is too emphasized at once. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that once I had. So there we've got darkness and corruption. Now that's death and decay, right? If the darkness and corruption leave, firstly we have this idea of maybe she'll get better, maybe there will be some connection between them in the afterlife, maybe they will be able to stay together. No, leave a vestige there. And there we have that connection of even if there's leaving, there's also remaining in that vestige, that trace of the thoughts that once I had. And this is meant to be the lover's thoughts, that even if there's a little bit of the speaker in the lover's memories that once I had, it's this idea that don't even have anymore. They have lost all of this total control, not control, but total love that filled every moment of the lover's mind with the speaker. Now it's just a little trace, a little bit, a vestige of the thoughts that once I had. Again, thoughts, so we're not getting into speech. Again, we're just having little echoey memories. Better by far you should forget and smile than that you should remember and be sad. And there we have again parallelism as well as a paradox there of the whole time she's been saying, don't forget me, don't forget me, don't forget me. Remember, remember, remember. And then in line 9, we have the beginning of that paradox with, well, don't forget me, but if you do forget me, here's what you do. And then again in the last bit here, better to forget and smile than remember and be sad. The whole time talking about remembering, but actually, you know what? It's okay. Just forget me. And that ending with the end stop, the full stop there, the first one that we have for a while is a sense of finality and acceptance of this. It ends here. And this remember, again here, we don't have the me again. So in either of these, and notice this is the last I here in the poem in the third to last line. So we've got a me and then we've got an I here. So it's fading much more into the background here. There is, of course, a sense of finality. We've got while and smile as the rhyme as well. So this idea of linking grieve and leave, but while and smile there. So this idea of this kind of every once in a while return to pleasant memories, etc. And notice the smile, again, extension across here. So thinking about the enjambment there, full enjambment of smile, and that savoring moment of memory, but that you remember and be sad. Now we end on sadness, of course, not happy. But it seems that this is the sadness, perhaps of the speaker, but also accepting and absolving of guilt, forgiving. This speaks to this selfless, self-sacrificial love that is linked to the Protestant ideology of the time. And also this sacrifice is desire to be remembered for the lover's happiness. And there is sweetness and peace, a little bit of a bittersweetness perhaps because they are still leaving, but that they've forgiven the lover for when that does happen. It seems like their sadness is knowing that the lover will perhaps let her down, is sad about it, but powerless against it, so decides to forgive. The enjambment across those last few lines suggests a sense of deep feeling, reaching, reticence to let go, but cannot be constrained, a sense of urgency, trying to, not trying to leave, but having to. And then, of course, we've got the rhyme scheme for these last 6 lines. And notice the rhyme scheme: C, D, D, E, C, E. So interestingly, these are brought together when necessarily they shouldn't be. It's much more common for Petrarchan sonnets to have an ABBA, ABBA, and then CDE, CDE, or CD, CD, CD. For that last sestet. And so in doing this, because obviously Rossetti knows a lot about Petrarch and so knows the rhyme scheme, we're seeing again a fading away, a presentness in this grieve and leave, but a fading away and these little moments of memory that come back. So it really does indicate the time of the poem. Now, of course, we need to think about this as a sonnet, which is a Petrarchan sonnet, so linked to the Pre-Raphaelites, her Italian heritage. Sonnets are meant to be about love and spiritual devotion, and particularly with Petrarch, it was unrequited love as well. Thinking of the Volta is the yet if you should. The fading away in that sestet, the interrupted fading away of memories. It echoes, but there's also resolution in that final ECE, had and smile and sad. There's a sense of harmony there. And the iambic pentameter shows the seriousness of the subject, almost Shakespeare-esque, linking there to the pre-Raphaelite brotherhood. And it mimics, but also the love. Iambic pentameter sounds like a heartbeat. So this perhaps a topic close to her heart, or that reaching out by the holding the hand, thinking about that heartbeat, but also perhaps her time running out as she thinks about her death. Important to notice the better, yet, only, and gone that are the words that change that rhyme scheme there, because that's also important. Clearly those words matter. And of course, we've also got those images of the silent land, darkness and corruption. That could be the grief, the burden of earthly life, the earthly decomposition because the soul has left. But it can also be death and decay, again, euphemisms for the sake of the lover in order to protect them from whatever is going to happen to the speaker. Feel free to pop into the chat anything that stands out to you, or any questions that you have. We've got quite a lot here that we've said so far. Then let's think about how we organize our ideas about love here. And I like to do this as we go down across the poem. So from beginning to end. So what does the poem say about love, or present love as at the beginning? We've got, for example, a sense of urgency in these reminders, attempting to conjure memories for the lover, to stay with the lover. Then in the second big idea, we have quite a lot more intimacy. So if we're thinking about the first big idea, we've got this insistency, we've got the separation here with this semantic field of death, the euphemism, etc., that no more, etc., and this half turn to go yet turning stay. And then in this kind of section here, we've got the ideas of intimacy and closeness, again, wanting to stay. the deep love with that hold by the hand, wanting to stay, we can return to again. This our future, perhaps this little bit of forgiveness here. The longing as well to stay with the speaker, sorry, with the lover, the reaching out, the touching, etc. Then we can certainly think about, in our third big idea, the shift, right? That's really important here. The shift pairs pretty well with talking more generally about the sonnet structure, doesn't it? The rhyme scheme, because that's as well when that rhyme scheme starts to change. And then, of course, we want to talk about the ending. So we could talk here about this resolution, the accepting of being forgotten. And that conclusion at the end, especially with that little paradox there. Thank you, Vanny, for reminding people of that. That's absolutely true. Any questions, anyone? So you can see how we can start organizing our ideas about love and how it changes, because love in line 1 is very different from love in line 14. And there's a lot that happens across this. So if we group our different ideas, and of course these can bleed into each other a little bit, and likely we'll want to talk about things from different parts of the poem if they fit in really well, or if they foreshadow or predict or prepare us for later parts in the poem, we absolutely can do. But we want to be mindful that if we just start talking about love as intense and longing and during this time of death, every paragraph will start to sound the same, and every paragraph will get really blurred together and you will start repeating yourself. So break the ideas of love into small chunks that you can digest bit by bit, because that will narrow the focus of your paragraphs, make them clearer and more achievable. If you're just talking about love the whole time, it's too broad for you to get really anything done in the time you have, and you'll find yourself talking in circles. Take it piece by piece, little bit by little bit. First cover the urgency, then cover the longing and the closeness, then cover the shift, then cover the resolution. Don't try and talk about it all at once. You just won't get to everything you want to say. And remember, this is a comparative. So we've got another poem we have to choose. And this is one I find is a really good match. So you'll want to work out which poems you can pair together beforehand, so that whatever poem you're given, you have an idea, depending on what theme you're given, as to what you would like to pair it with. That will save you so much time rather than flicking through the blank copies of the poems that you have and wasting your time, because this is such a tight timing anyway to do anything with a comparative poem, with comparative poems, that you must be mindful of ways to keep your timing achievable. So I'm going to do the exact same thing as we did for the other poems. So you get 2 of the poems, and both of these poems also appear in the Victorian anthology as well. So you will be able to cover these different ideas. Notice that we're looking again for meanings of how love are shaped. So let's be mindful here of looking for how love is presented here, and if we notice any similarities or differences as we go. I'm going to read and then we'll talk through it again. Okay. Echo by Christina Rossetti. Come to me in the silence of the night. Come to me in the speaking silence of a dream. Come with soft rounded cheeks and eyes as bright as sunlight on a stream. Come back in tears, of love, hope, love of finished years. Oh, dream how sweet, too bittersweet, whose wakening should have been in paradise, where souls brimful of love abide and meet, where thirsting longing eyes watch the slow door that opening, letting in, lets out no more. Yet come to me in dreams, that I may live my very life again, though cold in death. Come back to me in dreams, that I may give, pulse for pulse, breath for breath, speak low, lean low, as long ago, my love, how long ago. Again, feel free to put your ideas into the chat. If you're just joining us, I can think a couple of people just popped into the chat. The workbook for this lesson is in the description. Just enter your email and you'll be able to access it and download it and follow along with us. So let's talk about this second poem then, Echo. Well, firstly, the word echo appears in the title, but nowhere else in the poem. What do we know about echoes? Well, echo, again, is a repeat of something someone says. But we know that the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and Rossetti were interested in mythological allusions. And Echo is a mythological allusion to a mountain nymph written about in Ovid's Metamorphosis, which is that Roman classics influence of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood there. And Echo is punished for distracting Hera whilst Zeus was being unfaithful. And Hera punishes her by taking away her speech, except when repeating the last words. This is a punishment because Echo was speaking to distract Hera, and so she can only repeat the final words that someone else says. Echo, unfortunately, falls in love with Narcissus, who falls in love with himself. And as he's staring at himself in the reflection of the pond, Echo is staring at him. And because she can't say anything except what he says, she's not able to break through to him. In some versions, he rejects her. In other versions, for just answering what he's saying and copying him. And in other words, sort of echoing what Narcissus is saying to himself in the pool before Narcissus dies, wastes away looking at himself, and Echo wastes away looking at Narcissus. So here we have these ideas. We know that Rossetti was also 24 when she wrote this one. And this is also a lyric poem. A lyric poem is one that's meant to function originally like a song. It's about strong emotions and moments in time, and it's not usually narrative. It's about feelings. And it's often meant to sound quite lyrical, of course, with lyric poem. And we are going to hear, and we've heard as I've read it, the lyric, soft, dreamy sounds created through this constant use of consonants, assonance, rhyme, alliteration, sibilants, and meter that create this sense of euphony across the poem. Now, of course, if we're thinking consonants, assonance, rhyme, alliteration, sibilants, all of those are different kinds of rhyme. We also have repetition here. So we have this idea of echoing throughout the poem, both in the repetition and in the sounds that are making this kind of echoey sound. And this is also clear through the rhyme scheme here, which is A, B, A, B, C, C, and then D, E, D, E, F, F, G, H, G, H, I. So important then that we've got an interesting rhyme scheme of echoing back and forth and then a kind of fading away in that CC, a kind of resonance, almost as if you've plunked a piano key or tapped a drum and it kind of makes a sound and then it sort of fizzled out as a sound, right? Echoing and fading, echoing back and forth. And then we've also got the lines themselves. These are sestets, which is 6 lines in each stanza, but there are 3, which almost suggests this idea of echoing and fading out again because we're not getting an answer. But also if we had 2 sestets here, it would seem like a pairing, like a meeting, like a matching. Whereas we have this 3rd sestet seems to be sort of all on its own and unanswered, the way an echo eventually fades out. Now we've got into the poem, shall we? So come to me in the silence of the night. Come in the speaking silence of a dream. You might be thinking, wow, does this sound like, remember, absolutely there are commonalities. That's why this is a good poem to pick, because we can talk about this idea of come and remember being linked here. Come to me. Again, imperatives here, calling to a lover here in the silence of the night, the speaking silence of a dream. Again, we've got this idea of silence and lack of connection, quiet, but also we've got the oxymoron of speaking silence, which suggests a kind of meeting point or an in-between fuzziness between silence and speaking, or coming and going. And this makes sense because they're asking the lover, in this case, presumably is the person who is dead. The speaker is saying, come back to me at night, come back to me in my dreams so that we can be together. Even if we can't be together in real life, we can be together in that dream, in that liminal space. A liminal space is a space between spaces. Dreams in particular are them because they're this kind of link between the memories, the past, the present, death, life and death. And it's this fragile boundary. Remember, sleep also, if we're talking about the big sleep, would be a euphemism for death. So thinking about this as a kind of in between the temporal mortality there of it, but it also being something that will end, temporal, right? So this idea of come to me, but you won't be able to stay because you're dead and I'm not. And notice we've got that repetition, that parallel structure in the first 3 lines, as well as in the 5th line again, in come back. So again, we have these repeated imperatives here, that anaphora, repeated beginnings, continuing across the poem and acting as a kind of plea or prayer of the lover's persistence despite the separation. They're imperatives as well, which suggests a sense of pleading, like the other poem. But we've also got sibilants. Notice in silence of the night, speaking silence of a dream. And then later, soft rounded cheeks and eyes as bright as sunlight on a stream. Come back in tears. We've got a lot of sibilance there, which is this kind of hushing, glimmery connection. It's an echo. It's like sighing, perhaps crying, longing, reaching out, this kind of resonance, memory of the lover coming back and wishing, that almost wanting so badly you can feel it, right? And that come with soft, rounded cheeks and eyes as bright. That idea of beauty here as well, youthfulness, light being linked with life, and soft, rounded cheeks. Also not the hollowed cheeks of corruption and decay and death, but rounded cheeks. So come back alive, come back in life to me. But also these fleeting moments. It's almost like we have these little tiny flashes of this person, their cheeks, their eyes being bright, like sunlight on a stream. If you've seen a body of water moving and it's kind of glittery and glimmery in the light, that's what we're imagining here, is these little flashes of memory. And that sunlight on a stream, that's going to be flashing and fading and temporal, moving back and forth there as well. And that continuation, that fleeting moment. And the sunlight on a stream, notice that short line as well. Sunlight on a stream, short suddenly. The same with come back in tears. Suddenly we're noticing that the lines look shorter. It's a little bit like that undulation of a stream, isn't it? But it's also this kind of movement throughout the poem here. It feels cascading, doesn't it? And we're thinking of the shape as that gentle movement of a stream, as well as a fading and returning back and forth here. And it brings our eye and our mind to those words in particular. Sunlight on a stream, come back in tears. Notice as well that spondee there of come back in tears. So we have two emphasis there as well. That return of come back. It was fading away, eyes of bright sunlight on a screen. We lost that. Come, and then we come back again. A return, constant ebb and flow. And then that oh memory, hope, or oh love, hope, love of finished years there. We've got a triplet, cascading memories, building there. The exclamatives of oh and oh dream in the next one, being echoes again, perhaps an outpouring of love, longing, pain, grief there as well. And apologies, that should be oh memory, hope, love of finished years. Apologies for that. Cross that out. Little bit of a typo there. So it's almost like the memory is so painful there that we're desiring it more and more. Of finished years, though, unfortunately, that's the end of that sestet, and we end again on death and permanence, even in the end stop that we have there. The fact that all of this love, that life that was here, gone. And again, life and light definitely brought together in contrast to the darkness we have now. And then our second stanza, oh dream how sweet, too bittersweet, whose wakening should have been in paradise. So in other words, the dream of being back together in the dream is so sweet, it's almost too sweet. It's painfully sweet, it's bittersweet, because being together in a dream just means that they have to return to reality and wake up and return to not being with this person. So the sadness then of being lost here when you wake up and having to return to real life, and that sweet, sweet, sweet there as well. It's clinging on there, and that cherishing and yearning, as well as feeling that distance. Oh dream how sweet, too bittersweet. It's almost like we're moving away from the dream itself because it's so painful to come back to real life. And then that whose wakening should have been in paradise. So a couple of different ways to interpret this one. Either that the speaker wants to wake up, not in real life, but in paradise, wants to wake up in death and thus be with the lover again. Or we can think of it that awakening should have been in paradise, so that that paradise, heaven, should have been good. You should have been happy, because that's where souls brimful of love abide and meet. But it seems like it's a little bit disappointing. Should have been in paradise. That suggests that paradise is disappointing there. And this is reinforced here as well with the paradise and eyes, which is one of the furthest away rhymes that we do have. It's a little bit of a half rhyme, paradise and eyes. So there it again links those ideas of it's a little bit jarring. It doesn't quite hit our ear the way that paradise, that should be the best and most complete rhyme that we have, because that should be the place where things go perfectly and are perfect there. But it's a little bit disappointing. We have this idea of souls brimful of love abide and meet, where souls who are overflowing with love abide and meet. But again, thirsting, longing eyes. So that brimful of love, it's like the souls are a cup that's overflowing with love. But that's because they're spending time and meeting. But the people who are thirsty are looking at the door, supposedly St. Peter's gate, between heaven and the people on earth. You have to cross through it like a door, and waiting there for the person they want to be there too. So quite like I'm sure you have felt anytime you're waiting for someone to arrive, or waiting for someone at any point, waiting for them to come through the door, or if you've seen a pet do the same thing of waiting and waiting for the door, sitting there and waiting and just really wanting that person to arrive. Then we have that idea of waiting and that being a physical thirst in terms of how much the longing is, and juxtaposed with the brimful of love, that mini metaphor of that cup. There's a little bit suggested there. We have that this is unfulfillment, that paradise is unfulfilling. Imagine Rossetti saying that, those doubts then about the fulfillment that's meant to be completely total in paradise, when really it should be, it's disappointing because of the intensity and reality of the deep love on earth, that even paradise can't meet what love really is. Notice as well the soft consonants in this line, the W's, how sweet, whose wakening, where, twice. Watch the slow door in the next bit as well. We have this kind of trembling or longing there as well. As we're longing so intense, again, it becomes physical and sound, noticeable in sound. And that WWW across, we're again sort of hearing and waiting. That waiting is stretched out because they're just sitting there for eternity, waiting for someone to come and join them. That's painful, right? And notice this is even on the line level, because we've got the longing eyes, watch the slow door, that opening, letting in, lets out no more. It's also interesting because we could perhaps do an alternative interpretation where the speaker is the one who is dead and that they are in paradise waiting for someone to come to them, and waiting, sitting in paradise, just sitting there waiting, looking at the door, wanting their person to be there with them. And those eyes reaching out, pause, 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 wait, watch the slow door, pause, 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 that opening. So we do have the physicality of that waiting as well. And then that opening, letting in, lets out no more. Remember with the commas there, like with this first line here, where we're linking this intensity of things being sweet and then the distance of bittersweet gets too far away. We're building that. Here we've got that opening, letting in, lets out no more. The caesura there, we can almost hear the door swinging open and being like, it's not there. It's not there. But also then, again, the permanence of no more again. Now, don't link the fact that this poem and the other poem both say no more. There's not really enough to do that. You can, of course, talk about them both using semantic fields of death and longing and imperatives, but saying that they both say no more is not going to serve you as well. That's too small of a detail there, especially because no more is not returned to in this poem. So it's not necessarily important in this poem the way it is a little bit more important in Remember. The door, of course, as well, is a symbol here, a symbol, and the eyes as well, that connection, waiting, longing, and then the door being the separation between them. Not just life and death, but this becomes physical, the separation between them. And that letting in, letting out is that crossing of that liminal space between life and death, and seemingly unhappiness and filling. So that idea of the end stop there being the sense of finality, that cross between, it's a one-way cross, and that means the separation is permanent because the lover can't return to the speaker. They just have to wait until they die and then can go. That little bit of frustration there as well. Then our final stanza. Yet come to me in dreams that I may live my very life again, though cold in death. So here, thinking about returning to our ideas. As with the come back in line 5, we're returning to come again. We joined briefly in that dream, but it was so painful to leave and think about where that person is, waiting, waiting, waiting. And then we're returning. So, okay, solution then. Come to me in dreams, that yet being another shift. It's not a volta because this is not a sonnet, but it is a shift. Shift, come to me in dreams. So dreams then become again that liminal space between life and death where memory connects the two of them and love connects the two of them. Come to me in dreams, comma, that I may live. So there, this connection, creating life for the speaker. The comma there, come to me in dreams, that pause there slows down with that waiting, but also links to the restoration, the restoring, the revitalization that the speaker feels when their lover comes to them. That I may live, so that I can live again, because they themselves are dead with grief. Not necessarily physically dead, but dead through grief. Absolutely numb and unfeeling, and thus basically feeling like they're not alive without their love. That I may live, and then that notice, enjambment again, that I may live my very life again, though cold in death. So we have life twice, live and life there. Two words that are related there, related to the same idea, so linked to the semantic field of life here. And you can say also that they are related words if you're trying to think of a way to talk about them as not necessarily repeated, but related words that are linked together. Thinking about them as life, then creating life, bringing back to life. Life again, though cold in death. So this idea of warmth associated with death, whereas that's usually warmth associated with life, but the fact that she's cold in death now, the speaker, this idea of sensation again being brought back to them. The semantic field then of death, endings, and grief, juxtaposed with the semantic field of memory, of fantasy and dreams here as well. So thinking about death and dreams being life-giving. And the colon there as well, though, cold in death, that pause of feeling that pain again. Before we return back to come to me in dreams that I may give. So there we have again really close rhymes. Give and live there, linking back. So this idea of exchange here between the two of them. Come back to me in dreams. Again, return, come back. We've returned. We've been restored, come back again. In dreams, comma, that I may give. So give and live being associated here. Again, we're savoring those dreams in that pause, that comma as the caesura in both of those lines. And then we get into this last little piece here. Pulse for pulse, breath for breath. Speak low, lean low, as long ago, my love, how long ago? Then we've got here a really close diacope moment, close repetition here. And what's happening? It's almost as if they've come back together in a dream. So now we're back in the dream in this final stanza, and it's as if they're right next to each other, feeling each other's pulses, perhaps holding hands, breath for breath, face to face, exchanging breath, right? Not that they're kissing and not that they're giving mouth to mouth, but really that they're restoring each other's life and that this is an exchange, pulse for pulse, that they can share one pulse, one heart, one breath. They are one person, one life. There with that. And that repetition there, it's literally making them a pair, right? The diacope, pulse for pulse, breath for breath. It's almost realistic in how close those are together, and thinking of them as paired. 2 pulses, 2 breaths together. And then that speak low, lean low. So speak quietly, come close to me as we talk. So again, even closer physical connection, that physical closeness and intimacy crave that they seem to achieve in the closeness of their dream, that intimacy, connection, and touch that's reinforced by the consonants there, particularly the L's there, which suggest this really closeness. All of the words are really close together. They are really close together here. And notice the pulse for pulse, breath for breath line as well is a trochee, then a spondy, then an iamb. So it's ba bum, bum bum, ba bum. So it's almost like a sort of jittery change here as they're kind of transformed and come back to life with that final heartbeat at the ending, and then we're back into iambic meter there. And then as long ago, my love, how long ago. There we've got this sort of fading away. Speak lowly and low. So get close to me. Speak to me quietly as you used to do. How long ago? And this is the first time they're calling them anything, my love, but that couch there as well of those caesura of as long ago, my love, how long ago. So the love there being in the center, being set off by these two long agos, but there's some presence, some core in them that is still there, even as they fade away. And notice that we have got here the fading away, even in the lack of end stop at the end here, that we are kind of fading away as an echo does. And notice as well, the last time they talk about themselves is here in the I, that I may give, and then this kind of life-giving moment here. We've got these ideas of silence, time, and memory that get so quiet and close at the end here. They are reflections of grief, but also reflections of love. It's interesting that Rossetti's own beliefs are resonant here as well, because we're thinking about her beliefs as well as Christian Victorian beliefs of endurance, restraint, self-sacrifice, faith, and resilience, and thinking about the end of the poem as intimacy, closeness, and continuity of love despite the time and distance here. So them being connected and perhaps then sighing away again with the hope that they will return. So before we get into pairing these up, we can certainly agree that these poems have a lot in common. For example, if we look back at these big ideas, we've got these ideas of urgency, conjuring memories, intimacy and closeness, the shift, and then a resolution. And it seems that here we have quite a lot of the same. So let's think about how we can bring the ideas that we had from Remember back into Echo and make them fit together. So we might need to workshop our words from Remember, our big ideas from Remember, to make them fit together. But certainly at the beginning of both poems, we have this kind of sense of urgency, don't we? As they both long to come back to their lover. With their lover. This kind of longing and reaching out, that request. Remember, I'm saying urgency because we've got imperatives here. So there is a kind of demand or yearning here. But if you want to use a different word, by all means do, as long as they pair for both poems and you're not just talking about one poem, because that'll make it much more difficult to talk about the other one. Then for the second, with these ideas of hand holding and connection and staying, the our future, the remembering, the understanding, we've got some of these ideas of the dreams. right? The connection in heaven here. Perhaps some of this intimacy of these fleeting moments of memory and the wanting to reach out and be with here. So perhaps we can talk about love and longing here, or love and connection. Maybe in Echo, this being slightly more bitter than in Remember, where it's more accepting. But that can be falling under the broader umbrella of love, longing, connection, wanting it, just whether or not it's fulfilled or accepted is different. Then, big idea number 3, we've got quite a lot of structural ideas. We said that for structure of Remember, we've got that connection and shifting. So really here as well, we want to talk about the shifts back to this remember and the yet come back to me and the slow fading away, where we can talk about rhyme schemes and structure, the sonnet versus the sestet, the different choices they're making that are also all talking about this shift to connection, this shift to perhaps acceptance in the end. And then finally, in both the resolution or lack thereof. And even if the resolution is a little bit different across 2 poems, that's helpful. If we can talk about, they both conclude their ideas about love, however, one is more resolved and one is still ongoing, which really does seem to be the case for this, even though that echo does fade away. So there we've got 4 big ideas here. We can also talk about things like the love carries on despite the distance. We can talk about devotion, loads of different ways to talk about these ideas, right? These are just my words for a connection that you might find helpful to talk about slightly differently. But this will then become our paragraphs here. And so I've given you here some ideas for how to start these paragraphs, because it is in your topic sentence and in your best interest to link these ideas in your topic sentence and then establish how they're different, mostly using your writer's intention. So showing in both the theme of love is foregrounded through a sense of urgency. However, in Reminder, this urgency is because Rossetti is reflecting perhaps or highlighting the desperation of a speaker who wants to be remembered despite death, whereas in Echo, perhaps the Rossetti is seeking to link more to the mythological elements of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and to talk about the own losses of longing for a lost love. So that's just the spoken way of doing it. I'll show you some examples, don't worry. But this is the way that you can organize yourself, talking about the beginning of both poems first, so that you can cover the title, the introductory stanzas, the first few lines, the first impression that you get, then shifting to key images. Here, usually there's at least one in a poem, right? And then thinking about the structure or when these shift. And usually shifting is linked to structure anyway, which is why I've put structure more broadly. But we can think of structure broadly, or we can think of shifting more generally and thinking about when this idea changes. And then finally, the conclusion. So here we've got, again, this journey through both poems, which ensures that we cover the key moments, but also ensures that we are narrowing our focus to achievable paragraphs that don't then just become a 5-page long paragraph that gets very confusing and hard for your examiner to read. Here as well, you want to think about these questions in blue. So what do we have to include about these poems? So for example, we've got to talk about the fact that the title of Echo is Echo, right? And that's a mythological allusion. That has to happen. The same with the repetition of remember me and remember, we got to talk about that. We've got to talk about the paradise bit in Echo, and we've got to talk about that only remember me, you understand bit in in remember. And then we've got to talk about the endings, the forget and smile, remember and be sad versus the speak low, lean low bit of connection at the end there. So we've got to talk about those. How does this present link to life, beliefs, human experiences? We can think about both a contemporary audience as well as a modern audience. And we also need to link contextual information. This would be from Rossetti as well as from the Victorian era more broadly, particularly the mid-Victorian era when she was writing would be helpful to be specific. Here's some topic sentences I've put together, some guidance for how this could be. And if you take a look, it's very close to what we had, just phrased so that you can see what it looks like in a topic sentence to link these ideas together. So the first one, the theme of love is foregrounded through a sense of urgency as both speakers long to conjure lost loves. There we are. Second one, love as presented through key images of connection and longing is used to engage with the intimacy and love within the relationships. In 3, the poet uses the structure of both poems to engage with the theme of love through shifts towards acceptance and devotion to the lovers. And then in the conclusion of both poems, love is shown to extend even beyond the inevitable separation of time and mortality. So you can see how these sentence starters are applicable here. Because we're only talking about Rossetti, 2 poems of hers, we're not going to say both poets, but we can say and shift that if we have an anthology that is an era instead, for example, a period anthology, then you can make this work for both because you're still tying the themes together and then you're talking about the poets and the poems mostly separately. This, of course, is then what your essay is going to look like. Your 4 big ideas there. If you are thinking there is no way in an hour and 7 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes, depending, that you'll be able to do 4 comparative body paragraphs, then the suggestion I would make to you is to link these 2 together, because you definitely want to talk about the conclusion and you definitely want to talk about the structure, but oftentimes you can link those ones together most easily, whereas the beginning and the middle are likely distinct. Those ideas are probably defined with the ideas and the beginnings. Talk about the endings and the structure together, because then we can think about how that structure either changes or becomes cyclical at the end, perhaps, or concludes at the end as well. And as I said, a thesis statement is important, conclusion far less important, because it's better to wrap up your ideas clearly and succinctly and well, rather than dashing off some repeated lines in a conclusion. What does this look like at A level? Well, in poetry, across the different exam boards, you've got poetry as part of your assessment. For AQA, your set text, which is likely what Rossetti would be on, is paper 1, section C, or paper 2, sections A or B, depending on which options you have, whether that's set text comparison or poetry compared to another set text, so drama or prose. Of course, the comparative linking that you would do could still work because we're talking about themes, which frees you to do that for poetry as well. Just changing the word poem to both texts, for example. In Edexcel, this is condensed all to paper 3, your poetry. Your section A is your poems of the decade and unseen, and your section B is your set poetry anthology, which is where your Rossetti would be. And then for OCR and Cambridge, this would be in component 1, though of course you can also do it for coursework, as you can for AQA and Edexcel, though likely that is already sorted and submitted by now, hopefully. Now, we've spoken about this before, so if you've been here before, then you know a lot about the different assessment objectives, but across the different exam boards, they are asking for nuance, well-integrated AO1 and AO2, which as you can see are almost identical across the different exam boards, because these are worth the most marks. And you need to think about the argument as guiding you towards the terminology there, not the other way around. So don't start by saying both show metaphors, as we said, and instead say both show longing, and then say how they do that through the terminology. That's how you construct the argument and then use it to show how meanings are shaped. You also want to divide your ideas into parts of the poem. As I said, that will create a direct, focused argument, which is what you're looking for when they're asking for a perceptive and sustained and confident engagement, or when they're looking for a critical, evaluative argument. When they're looking for connections, that's also ticked in your topic sentences if you're linking them together in a clear way that's perceptive and assured, because it's saying I can see this theme in multiple ways in both poems. And it would also be critical evaluative if you're talking about Edexcel. It will also stop you from being less repetitive, because that shows that you can build different arguments and make them really clear and show the patterns woven in. Again, would be across the different literary texts, the connections between them, and the writer's contextual information, the significance and influence of it, as well as the choice of the writer's craft. So understanding why they're doing what they're doing and using these all the way through with mature expression. With Edexcel, you are being evaluated on AO1, AO2, and AO3 here, because that is your context. So it's important that you talk about the context of your poet and your poetry there. You also want to be mindful across different exam specifications. And Vanny is asking you in the chat, do you know you'll share them with? That you make sure you leave enough time for this question. I have seen it so many times that people, because they have multiple questions on these papers, are spending too much time on the first question and often not spending enough on the second. And all of these questions are the same amount of points. So you're doing yourself a disservice if you are not spending equivalent amount of time on both. I've seen it too many times in mocks and too many times in real exams where people spend 5 pages on their first paper, and on the second question in the paper, they only do a paragraph or 2. What a tragedy to waste all of your knowledge by doing that, not being able to show what you know. Before we get into our essay writing, I'm going to ask you here, if this has been helpful for you, please to leave us a Trustpilot review so that we can continue providing opportunities for you to do A-level content and to give you the best information that we can. That would be really appreciated to show that this has been helpful for you, so that we can continue offering these in the future. Would really appreciate that. And then as well for this, of course, you can take a look at my YouTube channel. There is so much content on there as well to help you with A-level. I also do GCSE content on the myedspace_English YouTube channel as well. So there is a lot of me on there doing different ideas from the different exam boards, particularly AQA for GCSE. And then also we have my resources for A-level students. Again, I'm popping that in the chat. That's all our texts for A-level that we cover, written up for you so that we can see you can see what information you can use to push yourself and how you can revise using some really high-level notes there. So please do give us a Trustpilot review. Please do take a look at my resources as well. We're really proud of all of the written and multimedia different notes and pieces of information we have there for you as well. Now let's talk thesis statements. So here with thesis statements, here is an example of both remember and echo so you can see it. Remember, a successful thesis statement will include a clear address of the question, ideally in the first few words. A brief explanation of how this question appears in both of your poems through the introduction to your lines of argument, your big ideas and otherwise. A contrast the writer's intentional presentations as influenced by contemporary society, values or biographical information, and a link to contextual factors that might have influenced this presentation. Because you have studied Rossetti, then you should know about her and be able to tie ideas about her or the Victorian era into your analysis. Here, Rossetti in both Remember and Echo presents love as urgent, full of longing and still intimate despite even the separation of death and years past. While Rossetti comments longingly on an imminent separation between a dying speaker and their lover in Remember, in Echo, she appears to be capturing more of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's fascination with mythological symbolism in her portrayal of a speaker who yearns for their lover to return to them continuously, despite a long-standing separation. Perhaps Rossetti's own struggles with physical health and her early experiences with tragedy thus reflect the Victorian customs of mourning that became a national experience during Queen Victoria's mourning of Prince Albert. So there we've got here addressing the question, how they present love, showing what poems we've chosen. These are our big ideas. Here, then we've got our introductions to how they're different with our writer's intention, comments longingly, etc. in Remember, here capturing the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, the symbolism, portrayal, yearning, etc. And then Rossetti's own experiences here, to thinking about the context as well as linking to Victorian customs and Queen Victoria. We've got all of our bases covered there. If you want to use this as inspiration, here are some ways you can do that. Here are some ways you can do that. Here are some sentence starters that actually build you to doing the exact same thing that I have done. Both poets explore the theme in poems 1 and 2 as they. While poet 1, if you have two poets, comments critically, comments thoughtfully, comments nostalgically, whatever, on whatever it is they're talking about. Poet 2 seems to conclude that same idea. Then poet 1 may have linking these ideas about writer's intention as well as context. Remember, particularly, some of you will have multiple different poets, so make sure you are not blurring their context together. For example, Tennyson and Rossetti are pretty close together, but Tennyson and Hardy are not. Thinking about the Victorian anthology, so being mindful that their context might not be exactly the same, or their message, what they're speaking to in society might not be quite the same. Then, as those of you who have been here before will know, I've done a model paragraph for you. So this is writing up that first big idea and showing you what it looks like. And you'll notice how long this is. Of course, it's because you're talking about two poems, and trying to do really deep and powerful analysis of both of those poems takes quite a while. So again, you might consider perhaps the fact that you might need to do 3 paragraphs rather than 4 in comparison, certainly for your first few attempts. And again, attempts are important. Practicing and writing this way takes time. So in this blue box above me, I've just shrunk myself out of the way so you can see a bit more. That's all of the ideas I want to include in this paragraph. So I've just kept them onto the side to myself so that you can see as well what goes into the different paragraphs. And you'll see this as we look at the other ideas as well, for what you can talk about for each of these. So I'm going to read this, and anything that you want to borrow, what stands out to you, what ideas inspire you to try out and to do on your own in your next example of a paragraph, by all means. And I'm going to read this for you. Apologies, just opening the door because it is quite hot in this room. Today in the UK, we've got quite a heat wave today. So I'm going to read, you think what inspires, what you would like to borrow for your own work. In both poems, the theme of love is foregrounded through a sense of urgency as both speakers long to conjure lost loves. However, in Remember, Rossetti reflects on the urgent final request of a dying speaker, perhaps influenced by Rossetti's own experiences with tragedy, while in Echo, Rossetti captures the longing and continuous devotion of a mourning that helped to define the zeitgeist of the mid-Victorian era. So there we've got the first bit is our big idea. The second bit is our writer's intention for each. So we're doing comparison and contrast even in that first sentence, as well as achieving our writer's intention. Well done us. We're ticking a lot of boxes by foregrounding those ideas. Then Rossetti foregrounds the urgency in the speaker's final request to their lover through the title of Remember. The imperative verb locates the audience immediately in the worry and urgency of the speaker. This also establishes a melancholic and even desperate tone as the speaker worries that their lover will forget them with the passage of time. Thus, the poem's title foregrounds the message of the poem, and the anaphora of the imperative remember across the poem further rings as continuous reminders to the lover. Perhaps then this poem itself becomes a written remembrance of the love of the speaker and their desire to be remembered even after death, and the silence of the silent land into which the speaker will have retreated. The use of this tone, the direct frank language across the poem, and the direct address to the lover initiated in the phrase, "remember me," creates a sense of intimacy that shows the depth of this relationship and suggests that this relationship is one in which a dying lover can speak plainly about their love and fears of separation. Perhaps then the speaker's urgency carries on across the poem even as they gradually begin to accept that they will be forgotten in time, regardless of the love in the relationship. Alternatively, Rossetti may use the repeated imperative "remember" to suggest a doubt in the authenticity and endurance of the lover's love as the repeated imperatives become desperate, pleading, and even doubting. Rossetti builds on this urgency about the end of a relationship through the use of a semantic field of death in the repeated phrase "gone away" and "the silent land." It appears then that the cause of the separation will be the speaker's own death. So even though we know that, by the way, it likely is death, our use of nuanced language suggests that it probably is, but we're not saying for sure. So we are going to be quiet in our nuance and suggest, well, that's one interpretation. Thus, the urgency of the speaker may be to offer a final reminder of their love before they're inevitably separated. It may also convey the fear, doubt, and grief that the speaker feels in this separation. The diacope of "gone away, gone far away" creates an increasing sense of distance between the speaker and the lover, and the addition of the adverb "far" emphasizes the extent of this distance. This appears to be the cause of the speaker's worry rather than an imbalance in the relationship's love. Interestingly, the semantic field of death is built through euphemistic language. The silent land and "gone away" perhaps then are attempts to assuage the worries and grief of the lover and thus demonstrate the self-sacrificial and intense love of the speaker, even as they themselves worry. The use of continuous end stops in the first few lines of the poem also suggest a finality to this separation, as well as again suggesting that the speaker is calmly urging the lover to remember her. Perhaps here Rossetti, herself undergoing struggles with physical health and family tragedy throughout her life, reflects on the difficulty of separation caused by the death of a loved one. In contrast, Rossetti's speaker in Echo, so we see we're building it in, appears to struggle more with the urgency of her love, while also suggesting that it will be unfulfilled. Rossetti's title serves as a mythological allusion to the nymph Echo, who is punished by Hera by being doomed only to repeat the final words of others. Consequently, her besotted attempts to woo Narcissus were ultimately futile. Thus, Rossetti foregrounds ideas of unrequited love and separation even through death. This mythological allusion perhaps is indicative of Rossetti's close relationship with the pre-Raphaelite brotherhood initiated by her brother Dante Rossetti, as the pre-Raphaelites took inspiration from Greco-Roman mythology and couched these allusions in richly wrought metaphorical language. Though references to Echo do not appear in the body of the poem, there are resonances of echoes across the poem through the rhyme scheme, structure, and continuous development of euphony across the poem. These are established in the first stanza of the poem with the soft sibilants of silence, speaking silence, and sunlight on a stream, which create a pleasant, longing tone that also suggests a sense of urgent reaching out to the lover who they long to reach, though they are separated seemingly permanently. The use of sibilants itself appears to suggest the figure of Echo reaching out to the lover she cannot reach. The use of the sibilants also serves as a kind of continuous presence across the first stanza and suggests the deep and ever-present love the speaker has for their lover. As in Remember, Rossetti develops a semantic field of death in the first stanza of the poem through the phrases silence of the night, speaking silence, and finished years. Again, as in remember, so notice just peppering in those as in remember moments so we link back and get credit for our linking. The language of death is suffused with euphemism, though here, we're saying they're both using euphemistic language, but we're showing it's different here. Though here it appears to operate as a way to reduce the distance between the speaker and their lover, who appears to be in paradise. As the speaker longs for the lover to come and return to them, it appears an urgent desire for communication and contact with the lover they know intimately and deeply. The anaphora in the imperative come suggests an urgent request which appears to be unfulfilled across the first stanza of the poem, as the speaker keeps returning to this phrase to implore the lover to return. However, the finished years at the end of the first stanza, reinforced by the hard end stop, suggest that despite the speaker's urgency, their request will be unfulfilled. Unlike in Remember, which appears to be influenced more by Rossetti's personal experiences, in Echo, Rossetti appears to be taking a more intellectual and contemporary approach to the concept of love and urgent longing, perhaps inspired by the Victorian customs of mourning led by its figurehead, Queen Victoria, and the conventions of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, who attempted to capture true and deep emotions in an artistic way. So not saying that this is your paragraph, but think about how you can borrow these ideas. Have you tried to talk about repetition or sibilance like this? Have you tried to and tie in those little mini moments of comparison? Have you tried to do a thematic approach like this? Think about what you can borrow and be inspired by for your work. If you're wondering, how can we do this? Here are some ways you can do that. Here there are sentence starters that are particularly curated for, in terms of the language, in Remember Rossetti, for example, but these sentence starters can be used for any poem analysis you like, or even, quite frankly, quite a lot of them can be used for drama and prose as well. But thinking about these, this is how we did it, is using these sentence starters here of assonance, consonants, a reflection on portrayed as more or less, the detailed language, the euphemistic language, etc. We've got all of those ideas here. Here are ways to tackle that. And if you want to try and write this paragraph and practice doing it with this idea of the key images of connection and longing, above me here are ways we can do that through the detailed language that creates imagery. For example, through the hand in Remember, and the line 4 in Remember, and line 7 in Remember with the only remember me, versus the dream in Echo, the sweet in Echo, the thirsting longing eyes as that image, the door as an image and a symbol, and then some context as well. Remember to choose context that actually serves your purpose of your paragraph, and not just tell me about the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood if it doesn't apply. Okay. The same can be used for structure. So these sentence starters are helpful for talking about structure, serving to do something, subtly foregrounding through a use of caesura or enjambment, etc. A rhyme scheme, crafting the poem or the stanza lines, etc. Whether it's a sonnet or a different kind of poem, like a lyric poem. And even this leading us to the cyclical or continuous structure, and then to our writer's intention at the end. And again, loads of ideas to talk about here: the Petrarchan sonnet, of course, the lyric poem, the rhyme schemes, the uneven lengths of lines in Echo, the mini volta in Remember. We've got loads to talk about there. Again, you're welcome to try and practice this paragraph for yourself. You've got everything you need here. It's just a matter of writing it up. Same, talking about the conclusions. Again, some sentence starters for conclusions, as well as evidence for the conclusions as well. And we've got the final two lines of Remembers, the juxtaposition of forget and smile, remember and be sad, as well as with Echo, the come to me, the returning to that in the final stanza, the diacope of the final three lines in Echo, the lack of the final end stop in Echo as well, the consonants, and some context there for you as well. So there is loads you can borrow. Again, this is all in your workbook, so you don't have to copy these down, but you will have them in your workbook so that you can practice writing these up and practice applying these for yourself. And then we've got a conclusion. As I said, not the most important part of an A-level question, but something that if you want to know how to do it, this is the way you do. A successful conclusion will return to the question, summarize briefly the big ideas, even in a couple of words, push these arguments a little bit further to link to their conclusion or final presentation, and a suggestion of the writer's intention or the different audiences' reaction, contemporary and modern, of the poems as a whole, rather than just specific parts of the poem. So here is an example. In conclusion, Rossetti portrays love as full of urgency, longing, and yet a quiet acceptance of the inevitable distance in both remember and echo. That's topic, the question there, and the big ideas. Then, however, while remember continues with concludes with acceptance, and thus the poem itself becomes a poignant reminder of the speaker's love after death. Echo contains more bitterness and may reflect Rossetti's own doubts about her spiritual devotion and the love that she lost as a result. Though in both poems Rossetti may have sought to reflect the zeitgeist of a society in national mourning, perhaps she also sought in her own way to address the universal themes of love and longing that captured both her society and modern society today. Though Rossetti's modern audience may not be familiar with the customs of mourning that would be second nature to a Victorian audience, they may still find solace and connection in Rossetti's portrayal of love at the end of life as bittersweet, though ultimately filled with deep devotion and forgiveness. So they're pushing it a little bit farther than we've spoken about previously in talking about a modern audience and their differences, and the big picture meaning of love and longing, people losing people, and though we don't know about these customs of mourning, we can still understand the message here. If you want to practice doing this yourself, again, we've got sentence structures for you here, linking the theme back again in the first sentence and the big ideas, showing a little bit of difference if you like, the writer's intention, the audience, that's it, you're done. So it can be really 2 to 3 sentences. And where can you go from here? So you have all of this information in front of you. I've spoken to you for almost 3 hours now about Rossetti and poetry and A-level literature more broadly. So what can we do here? What do you have in front of you? You have 2 fully annotated poems. You have organized notes and lines of argument. You have model paragraphs as examples and guidance for how to write your own model paragraphs, including sentence starters and what you can include in each of those paragraphs as we structured them. So how can you apply this knowledge? Well, you can write out the comparative essay on remember and echo to practice writing a comparative essay, or just write a comparative paragraph or practice writing a comparative thesis statement. I know loads of people worry about their thesis statement because it's your way into an essay, right? So you want to make sure that you're doing those quickly and effectively, but also skillfully. You can practice your planning skills by making a comparative essay plan following this guidance. So doing what we did today for an unseen poem and one of your studied poems, for example, for section A of unseen poetry and poems of the decade for edXL. Or you could do this and think about how you plan this out, following the same structure, taking both poems, the big ideas, and then writing out perhaps your topic sentences with the writer's intention. You can practice generating a comparison with one of these Rossetti poems. So just Echo and another poem, one of the Tennysons, one of the Barrett Brownings, one of the Brownings, for example, or just a different Rossetti poem from the anthology. Make sure, though, that if you're choosing a poem from your studied poems, or of an unseen, if you're just choosing one at random, make sure it contains the same theme of love, because otherwise your life will be difficult if you're trying to write about a poem that doesn't have any love in it, or if it has a different kind of love, like familial love rather than romantic love. You can also apply this structure to the annotation, planning and writing for another set of studied poems. So you can take this away and use this, for example, for Keats. Use this for 2 Tennyson poems. Use this for an Elizabeth Barrett Browning and a Robert Browning poem. Or for 2 poems of the decade, for example, if you really want to practice doing poems of the decade. Of course, you won't compare 2 poems of the decade, but you can practice to help you revise those, and 2 at the same time. You can practice the double annotation method. So that would be annotating and then coming up with your big ideas and then highlighting which of your big ideas appears where, so you organize yourself there. And we talked about that as well in our previous lesson, or previous exam masterclass 2 weeks ago on unseen poetry. For a studied poem or an unseen poem, to practice organizing evidence into lines of argument. So if you are thinking that these lines of argument idea is new to you and you want to try it, then absolutely do it for 1 poem. Choose a poem to annotate and then organize into your big ideas and highlight where those big ideas appear on a fresh copy of the poem, so that you know you've organized your notes for yourself. That's also what appears in those blue boxes in the model paragraphs we looked at. You can plan or write another comparative essay using 2 poems you want to revise. So come up with a theme, or a theme you want to revise, as well as 2 poems you want to revise, and plan. You can just plan, or you can write as well. You can use the essay plan structure to practice developing lines of arguments for different themes. So you can say, okay, if this theme and love came up, if this poem and death came up, what would I do? What would I compare it to? Plan that so that you already have it ready. You now know that if you have either Eco or Rossetti, or remember, if you have Rossetti as one of your studied, that you could do the other one and have some lines of argument already sorted. You can also review the poetic devices that I've given you. Make flashcards for them to review their definitions or effect. The same with the tone. Different tone words, review their definitions and effect. Or you can look at a previously written essay and edit it. So if you didn't do your essays in this style before, have a look back at an essay and think, okay, what can I do to make this more like the essay we looked at today, and bring out more nuance in your lines of argument, link them differently, or add analysis using the sentence starters. If you want to try talking more about sibilants and assonance and alliteration as repetition or rhyme scheme, or talking about Petrarchan sonnets, then just take those sentence starters there and apply them into a paragraph you already wrote and give it a rewrite, and use the model paragraphs for guidance there. So this question is really about you. So pop into the chat. How will you use this? What are you going to do to take away? Because it's all very well and good to listen to me talk about it for 3 hours or 2 hours and 47 minutes, as we are currently, but think about how you can use this for yourself and make a commitment to taking this away and actually applying it so it's helpful for you, because that's the real point, right? Now here, these are some top tips for poetry analysis more broadly. So you can apply these for unseen poetry as well. And you can apply them for any poem, really, because poetry is such a worrisome issue for people sometimes. These are just some different ways to attack, and mostly they are questions that you're asking yourself as you go through. So you could find this helpful to print this out and glue it into your workbook, the front page, so that you always go back to these questions to add complexity and nuance if you're stuck on a poem, and then they become part of your practice there. Remember as well, we're nearly at the end, but please also do feel free to leave us a Trustpilot if you need to head off now. That would be wonderful to be able to show how much you enjoyed this lesson and your positive experiences and how you found this helpful. So here, start with the title of the poem. What expectations or ideas does this title introduce? Are these expectations met or subverted in the poem? As you read through the poem for the first time, keep your pen or highlighter at the ready. Mark any lines, words, or choices that stand out to you, because likely they stand out for a reason. Think, why does this stand out? What big ideas are foregrounded at the start of the poem? Do these ideas change or remain consistent across the poem? Consider the structure and organization of the poem as well. What do you notice about the structure? Does this structure link to any ideas? So not just that it is a Petrarchan sonnet, but that a Petrarchan sonnet is talking about love. What might this structure help to highlight? What ideas, in other words? For example, that change in Petrarchan rhyme scheme, what is that trying to tell us? Does the structure change at any point? If so, why might this be? As you move through the poem, pay attention to the choices or focus of the poem. The poet will be trying to direct your attention to specific ideas or images. If you notice a poetic device in the poem, think, why might this be? What effect does it have on you or your understanding as a reader? Does this pair with any other ideas or devices across the poem? Are there moments of rhyme in the poem? Why might this be? What patterns do you notice across the poem? What impressions do they give you? Why might they exist? What ideas or images appear in the poem? How are they expressed? Does this expression change at any point? Is there a turn, twist, or change of perspective in the poem? How is this achieved? Why might this be? Take note of punctuation or the lack thereof, particularly caesura, absence of end stops, etc. How is this achieved? Is this an indication of breath, pause, reflection, disruption to the previous idea? What might the poet be trying to express or point out or make us notice here? What words in particular are they drawing our attention to? Consider, is there a different way to interpret these ideas? Is there any room for a different interpretation of this moment? Where are there moments of ambiguity, uncertainty, or vagueness in the poem? Can we dive, in other words, into this section and offer some ideas rather than avoiding this section? How does the poem conclude? What is its final message? How does this relate to the other sections of the poem? Consider the poetic conventions. Is the structure, rhythm, and rhyme scheme consistent across the poem, or does it change? Is there a cyclical structure? Are there echoes of a poetic form, like a truncated sonnet or a dramatic monologue? And remember to keep the speaker and the poet distinct. How might this poet's experiences or time period affect their presentation of ideas? So those are all my biggest top tips there for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And Vanny is also there to help you if you need. I'll give you a moment just to pop any ideas you have into the chat. And then finally, I'm happy to answer them and do a little Q&A with you if you need. We've got about 5 minutes left. But again, this is the end of our lesson. So thank you so much for participating here. Please take a look at my other content on Eleanor Does English, which is my channel, because I have done a lot of A-level content for you, ideally to help you there. And please also take a look at my Edspace_English on YouTube as well as on social media as well. And there will be lots more content incoming across the exam season, and we'll also of course be carrying on next year with more content and more opportunities to help support you. A final push please for the Trustpilot review. If you could, that would be so appreciated, because that will be able to continue our work. I'll be able to provide more A-level content for you. So if you found this helpful, please do let us know so that we'll be able to continue providing it. And then finally, just a fulsome congratulations on getting this far. Really well done to everyone who's stuck with us from the beginning of this 3-hour stream now. And really, really good luck with all of your exams. I know it's a really long struggle as we go through this whole big season of exams, but you've done really, really well. If you're going to use this, I'm confident it will help you as well. Well done for working hard and taking the extra step to do your revision and to work hard on it as well. And if there are no any other questions, then just a final thank you for participating and very good luck again. And see you all next time. Bye for now. Bye.